The house stood empty, not for a week and not for a season, but for years. Long enough for dust to learn the shape of the rooms, and long enough for children to dare one another to climb the stairs, then run before they reached the door. This was the West Bow in Old Edinburgh, a steep, twisting street falling from the upper town towards the grass market, with stone above stone, windows facing windows, dark stairs and rooms where reputation could be heard through the wall. Near the top of the bow stood a house people would not live in. They said the stairs played tricks, so that a person climbing might feel that they were descending. They said a room could be empty, then not empty. They said that something moved there after a man was dead, and it was not always a ghost. Sometimes it was only a staff. The staff had belonged to Major Thomas Weir, a soldier, a covenanter, a man of prayer, a public saint of the West Bow, and, if his own confession is to be believed, something else entirely. In 1670, in old age and sickness, Weir began to speak. He did not wait for accusation, he accused himself, speaking of sin, vice, witchcraft, dealings with the devil, and crimes so extreme that even the Lord Provost of Edinburgh reportedly thought the confession too impossible to act on. Then his sister Jean spoke too. Jean Weir, or Grizzle as some called her, gave the story its darker furniture. A witch mother, a devil's mark, a fiery coach, supernatural knowledge, and the staff, always the staff. The brother was strangled and burned, the sister was hanged, the staff went into the fire, and the house remained behind, empty, watched, and remembered. You are listening to Noir Frequency. Tonight we open the case file on Major Thomas Weir, the Warlock of West Bow. The story of Major Weir has to be handled in layers. There is the historical man Thomas Weir, usually dated to 1599 to 1670, a Scottish soldier, a covenanter, a strict Presbyterian, and a figure of public religious reputation. Then there is the confession, a late-life collapse in which he reportedly admitted to hidden crimes and spiritual corruption. There is the trials set inside a 17th century legal world, where witchcraft was not metaphor but a capital charge. And then there is the afterlife, a haunted house, a walking staff, a calf apparition, and a legend that outlived the West Bow itself. The danger is to begin at the end and call him a warlock. That was what later Edinburgh remembered. But the shock of the case depends on who he seemed to be before that word attached itself to him. A holy man, a severe man, a man whose prayers drew visitors to his house, and a man called the Bowhead Saint. That is what makes this story hold. Not that a wicked man was condemned, but that a saint confessed himself into darkness. Thomas Weir was born far from the West Bow in Lanarkshire, near Carluke. Later tradition gives him family connections, military service, and covenanting zeal. He served in the unsettled wars of the 17th century, a period when Scotland was torn between Crown, Covenant, Church, Army, and conscience. The word Covenanter matters. The Covenants were not casual statements of belief, but national religious and political commitments, bound to the defence of Scotland's Presbyterian Church against royal interference. For those who held them seriously, religion was not private comfort. It was law, identity, duty, and battle. Weir became associated with that world of severity. He was said to have served as an officer, and later gained the rank of Major through command of Edinburgh's Town Guard. By the time he lived in the West Bow with his sister Jean, he was known not only as a soldier but as a man of prayer. His prayers were remembered as powerful, and people came to hear them. He and those around him were known as Saints of the Bowhead, not because anyone thought them gentle, but because in that stern religious world, visible devotion had its own authority. This is the first mask of the story. Not a false face in the simple sense, but a public face. A face the city knew. The face neighbours trusted. The face that made the confession almost impossible to believe. When a man already marked as wicked is accused, the story goes where expected. When the holy man speaks against himself, the ground moves. In 1670, Thomas Weir was ill and old, and nearing the end of his life. Then he began to confess. The accounts say that he did not simply admit to one fault, one hidden shame, or one lapse of character. He spoke as if pulling down his entire public identity. He confessed to sexual crimes and spiritual corruption, to things so grave that this script does not need to linger over them. It's enough to know that the confession reversed the meaning of the man. The saint became the accused. The house of prayer became a chamber of suspicion. The staff at his side became evidence. The Lord Provost, Andrew Ramsay, reportedly did not accept the confession at first. That detail matters because even in a time that believed in witchcraft, and even in a city shaped by punishment, the confession was too much. It was too extreme, too self-damning, and too difficult to place inside the known man. But Weir continued. The confession would not go away, and when the authorities finally moved, they did not only take Thomas, they took his sister too. Jean Weir is sometimes called Jane, sometimes Griselle, and sometimes Griselle. She lived with Thomas in the West Bow, and the story often makes her the second monster of the house. But she should not be handled so easily. To modern eyes, Jean may look less like a villain than a trapped witness, a woman living in the shadow of an older brother, caught inside his confession, and inside a legal and religious system ready to hear witchcraft in the language of distress. That does not erase what she confessed, but it changes the moral temperature of the room. Jean's confession made the case supernatural. She claimed their mother had been a witch, that Thomas bore the mark of the devil, and that he had powers. Most importantly for the legend, she gave those powers an object, his staff. Later accounts describe it as thornwood, topped with a carved human head. It was a walking stick, yes, but in the legend it was never only that. Jean said he drew power from it, and folklore later made it restless. It was seen, people said, moving where no hand moved it, parading through rooms and walking the streets before him. Then came the fiery coach. Jean told of a strange journey to Dalkeith, where Thomas was said to have received supernatural intelligence about the defeat of the Scots at Worcester. In one reading, that is sorcery. In another, it is rumour. In another, it is political news travelling through the channels of war. That is how the Weir case works. Every detail has two lives, a legal life and a legendary one. A thing said under pressure, and a thing retold by a city that wanted its darkness to have a shape. The trial began in April 1670. By then, Scotland had long been inside the age of witch prosecution. The Witchcraft Act of 1563 was still in force, which meant that witchcraft was not an eccentric belief or a private fear. It could become a charge, a trial, a sentence, and a death. The Weirs were not the only people in Scotland to be accused of witchcraft. Thousands were accused across the broader period from the 16th to the 18th century. Their case is unusual because of Thomas's public status, the presence of his own confession, the involvement of his sister, and the way the story later attached itself to a specific house. Thomas and Jean were found guilty, though their punishments were different. Jean was hanged at the grass market, while Thomas was strangled and burned near the head of Leith Walk, associated with the old execution ground and the Galilee. The staff went with him. According to tradition, it was thrown into the fire after him, and there the story says it moved, twisted, turned, and refused to become only wood. We should be careful with last words. Stories love last words because they give death a shape, and Weir is often remembered as refusing prayer, saying he had lived as a beast and must die as one. Whether exact transcript or later sharpening, the line tells us how the story wanted him understood. Not redeemed, not reconciled, but recognised. Then came the part no court can control, the legend. After the executions, the house in the West Bow became the centre of the legend. People said it stood empty, and some accounts say for more than a century. That may be too neat, too perfect, and too shaped by retelling. But the important fact is not the exact number of years, it is that the house was remembered as uninhabitable. A house can become guilty, not legally and not in any court, but in memory. A room can hold the shape of what people think happens there. A stair can inherit a confession. A window can become a warning. The top of the West Bow became known for generations as Major Weir's land. The name turned the place into evidence. Walk through the city and the story was underfoot. Not in a book, not in a court record, but in the street itself. Then there are the haunting details. The stairs that confuse direction, the staff seen moving in the old rooms, the house that no family wanted, and later the story of William Patullo, an ex-soldier said to have taken the house cheaply around 1780. The first night, the story says, he and his wife saw something come into the room. It was not Weir, not Jean, and not a demon with horns, but a strange calf-like apparition that came to the bed, placed its forelegs upon it and stared. It is almost absurd, and that is why it works. The best ghost stories do not always choose the expected shape. They choose the thing that makes the room wrong. A calf where no calf should be. A staff where no hand holds it, or a stair that lies about direction. The Weir haunting is not about seeing the dead, it is about the world failing to behave. The old West Bow did not remain unchanged. Edinburgh remade itself. Streets were altered, buildings were demolished, and the medieval shape of the bow was softened, opened, and folded into a more orderly city. Weir's house disappeared, no visible trace remains. But disappearance is not the same as forgetting. By the time the building was gone, the story had already moved into print. Antiquarians, local historians, and writers preserved the tale. Robert Chambers, James Grant, Walter Scott, and then later writers, ghost tours, novels, and walking routes. Walter Scott helped preserve the image of schoolboys daring one another to approach the ruin, afraid they might see the enchanted staff moving through the rooms. That detail matters because the haunting has already become social by then. It is no longer just what happened in the house, it is what people dared one another to imagine there. That is how the case changes. A confession becomes a trial becomes a haunting becomes a city story, and a city story becomes part of Edinburgh's identity as a place where stone remembers what flesh cannot. Perhaps that is why Major Weir lasted. Not because the facts are simple, because they're not. And not because the supernatural claims can be settled, because they can't. Because it tells a story of a fear that Edinburgh already knew, that holiness may hide corruption, reputation may be a locked room, and confession may come too late to save anyone. Let us look again, not to decide too quickly what Major Weir was, and not to call every accusation fact, not to strip away the story of its darkness, but to see what it carries. A soldier in a divided Scotland, a covenanter with a public name for prayer, an old man in sickness confessing to crimes no one had forced him to confess, a Lord Provost who reportedly found it too much to believe, a sister whose words turned hidden sin into a witchcraft story, a staff with a carved head, a fiery coach to Dalkeith, a trial in the world of the Witchcraft Act, a brother burned, a sister hanged, a house left to rumour, a calf at the bed, a stair that misled the feet, a city that demolished the walls but kept the name. None of this gives one clean answer. If Weir was guilty of what he confessed, then this is a story of public holiness rotted from within. If his confession came from illness, breakdown, religious terror, or a mind at the edge of death, then this is a story of a culture ready to turn collapse into diabolism. If Jean was telling the truth as she understood it, then the house was darker than even Weir's confession. If Jean was broken by circumstance, then the story becomes darker in another way. This file doesn't close neatly because the historical man is buried beneath confession, the confession is buried beneath trial, the trial is buried beneath folklore, and the house is buried beneath Edinburgh. But the staff remains in the story, tapping at the floorboards. Major Weir's house is gone. The old West Bow has changed. The rooms where people said the staff walked have been demolished, rebuilt, renamed and swallowed by the city. But the story remains. It remains because it is not only a witch story, not only a ghost story, and not only a scandal. It is a story about the terror of the trusted face, the holy voice, the neighbour who prays loudly enough for the city to hear, and the room no one entered until the confession opened the door. Perhaps the staff never moved, perhaps the calf never came, perhaps the stairs did not lie, perhaps the house stood empty because memory can be stronger than rent, or perhaps there are places where the story is not finished within the walls. What matters is that Edinburgh remembered him through an object, not the sword, not the uniform and not the Bible, but the staff, the thing that steadied him in life, the thing accused of empowering him in secret, the thing that burned beside him, and the thing that later walked without him. The Saint of the West Bow became the Warlock of the West Bow. The house became Major Weir's land, and the city learned that some confessions do not end at the gallows. You have been listening to Noir Frequency. If this story found you, there are a few small ways to help the signal travel further. Like the episode, share it with someone that knows that old cities do not forget everything they bury. Subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. If you want to go deeper, you can join the Patreon at patreon.com/noirfrequency for early access, bonus material, and an ad-free feed. And if you want to carry the signal out into the world, visit noirfrequency.com for the store. Thank you for being here, and until next time, keep listening.